Shalom, Kahalaliyam La Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, Waharakakurash, double honors to the apostles, bishops, and elders of GMS who rule well, and salutations and blessings to you elect, starting with 144,000 on down. So we're in the time of Easter, so-called Easter. All right, this is a time where backwards Christians have no understanding that you're partaking in paganism. You're actually worshiping a pagan god, or goddess in this case. So when Christians they'll say, well, look, we have Easter, in the book of Acts. And then when you look up the word Easter, right, this is Acts 12:4, and when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to four quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Right, when you look this up in the Edom, or in the Inter, here, right, Pascha, all right, which is a Greek way of saying Passover. Okay, so there is no holiday called Easter that the followers of who you call Jesus, all right, we know him as the Yahushai, there is no case of them keeping such a so-called holiday, which it is a holiday. It's just a holiday on the left-hand side, right? It's a holiday for you wicked people. So this is from the MessianicObserver.org, and down here, skipping down, it says who was and is Asherah. Asherah was a Mesopotamian, and more pertinent to our discussion, a Canaanite god or goddess. She or it is believed to have been worshipped and respected as the consort of the Sumerian god Anu and the Ugaritic god El and the Canaanite god Baal. In many respects, this goddess seems to be one and the same entity known as the Queen of Heaven, aka Semiramis. So this is where we understand that all these different religions, whether they be Assyrian, okay, Canaanite, it doesn't matter what nation, okay, Moabite, all these different gods, they all stem from that Mesopotamian region of the worship of Nimrod, okay, and his woman Semiramis and their son Tammuz, the so-called Trinity. That's where you get that from. The Trinity is not a biblical concept. It's not a biblical doctrine, okay? The Christians use one scripture in the book of, I believe, 1 John. But anyway, this video is not about that. It says, I contend that Asherah was and still is a real spiritual entity that stands in opposition to Yahweh and his elect. Okay, it says Jehovah, but it says here, sorting out Asherah poles and groves. These groves were trees the Canaanites planted, erected by the Canaanites for purposes of lending tribute and reverence to Asherah. She or it was mate or consort to El, the supposed creator of the universe. Asherah is said to have been the mother of several demigods from the Canaanite pantheon. Some 70 demigods are said to have been birthed by Asherah. This being the case, it should be mentioned that in certain Gnostic beliefs and writings, Asherah has also been tied to Eve as the mother of all living. Right? And again, that mother goddess, Queen of Heaven, worshiping. Right? The whole issue or connection to the worship of Asherah and trees has been forcefully tied by the spiritually corrupted to the biblical mention of the tree of life. Now this is how the actual trees would look, something like this. They would actually carve out these trees or groves, right, and worship. It says the first mention of the Asherah pole is found in Exodus 34:13. Then later we are instructed to not plant and to destroy Asherah poles or groves. Now when we go to the book of Exodus 34, start at 12, it says, take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee, but ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. Right? In the NLT, in the 13, it says, instead you must break down their pagan altars, smash their sacred pillars, and cut down their Asherah poles. right? In the Hebrew, the actual word for grove here, right, it actually says Asherah, right, or Asherah. We can go to Asherah, right? So this is what it actually means by groves. And at these groves, they would perform ceremonies, right? Wicked as hell. The trees or plants customarily used in Asherah worship included grapevines, pomegranates, walnuts, myrtles, and willows. These groves were typically planted on scenic hilltops, right? And you see this, man, all throughout from Exodus to the Kings to the Chronicles, where different kings they would plant these different groves on hilltops, man. You know, that was a common theme, right? It says um, some groves were strategically planted along well-traveled paths, and they were serve as resting places for weary travelers. Asherah as idols. When Asherah is mentioned in the plural, it generally pertains to cult objects related to the worship of the fertility goddess Asherah. In short, we're talking about idols of some sort. But as it relates to groves and groves consisting of trees and being representative of the goddess Asherah, it appears that back in the day the Canaanites took trees and fashioned them into female forms. These stylized trees were apparently seductive and designed to elicit base desires within the worshippers. They probably popped the tree. They were definitely having orgies around and doing all that, right? And this is where you get that whole stripper pole, the Asherah pole. That's an Asherah pole, right? The strip club, the strip poles. Okay, what is the end goal? Seduction, right? That's it. It's just a place where you go, you have libations, drinks, and some other party stuff. You know, these strippers, they do, quick bumps of coke, and it's all just, nothing but sexual lasciviousness, pretty much. Okay, but in ancient times, this is how part of how you worshipped Asherah, right? All right, elicit base desires within the worshiper, in particular with male worshippers. This all makes sense, of course, since Asherah was perceived and worshipped as the central fertility god of the Canaanite pantheon. Okay, now let's go to this website, the real Samizdad.com. Right, the rites of Ishtar. Okay, it says her worship was a reflection of that worship of nature which underlay the Semitic conception of Baalism. The fierce passions excited by an eastern sun found their expression in it. Prostitution became a religious duty whose wages were consecrated to the goddess of love. She was served by eunuchs and by trains of men and boys who dressed like women and gave themselves up to women's pursuits. Do you see how the world is operating? What I just read, exactly what I just read, the present state of the world popped in my head, where all this madness is going on. This was in the ancient world. That which has been is that which shall be, right? There's no new thing under the sun. So, pretty much that was the way to worship, man. You had a thing called temple prostitutes. And that's what this society amplifies and inflates. And it actually creates these little temple prostitutes starting from school, elementary, high school. You go into college, you're a complete hoe. Okay, in university, in sororities, fraternities, right? You're a complete degenerate, right? And it just escalates from there. And you're all partaking in idolatry, fornication, right? You're all just under a spell. So, like I said, bro, it starts young, man. You know, and it's amplified even more by the media, and you get these little backbones and these little stimuluses and all these different influences that you see. Like I said, it even expanded. Now you have it in the palm of your hand, in your phone every day, social media, right? It just inflates all these desires and ideas that you already have as a carnal being. Yes, that's good. Keep going. Oh, that's fine. Don't be ashamed. you know, give in, right? So You see how they got down in the ancient world. Ishtar, in fact, had ceased to be the pure goddess of the evening star. The other element in her hybrid character had come to the front, aided by the Semitic conception of the female side of the divinity. She was now the fruitful goddess of the earth, teeming with fertility, the feminine development of the life-giving sun god, the patroness of love. The worshippers who would serve her truly had to share with her pains and pleasures. Only thus could he live the divine life and be, as it were, united with the deity. It was on this account that the woman wept with Ishtar each year over the fatal wound of Tammuz, right, in the book of Ezekiel. All right, you've seen that example. It was on this account that her temples were filled with victims of sexual passion and religious frenzy, and that her festivals were seen of consecrated orgies. See, and this is what you Israelites were doing, man. That's why the Lord is not happy with you. You know, now how do you do it? You have your caravana, you have your clubs, you know, nighttime all dark, a club representing death. You know, you just have this form of death, this way of life that's fashioned in death and really madness, like it just said, religious frenzy and sexual passion. Your baser nature, you're just driven by that. That's your engine, you know. It says, as the worship of the goddess spread westward, the revolting features connected with its spread at the same time. The prophets of Israel denounced abominations committed in honor of Ashtoreth and Baal within the sacred walls of Jerusalem itself. The Greek writers stand against the violations of social decency enjoyed as religious duties on the adorers of the Oriental Aphrodite and Lucian himself. If Lucian indeed, but let me just skip down. That was it on that. Now I asked ChatGPT as well. How was Ishtar worshipped by groves? The worship of Ishtar often took place in groves or sacred gardens, which were common features in ancient Near Eastern religious practices. Here's a quick breakdown of how she was worshipped in these settings. Groves were seen as sacred natural spaces, often associated with fertility, life, and the divine feminine attributes closely linked with Ishtar. These groves might be planted near temples or be natural spots set aside for worship, right? Rituals and worship, and offerings, sorry. Worshippers brought offerings of food, drink, incense, and flowers. Some rites involved burning incense or making libations, right, which is what we have today. Trees in the groves could be adorned with ribbons, carvings, or votive objects left by the devotees. Sexual rites and sacred prostitution. Ishtar was a goddess of love, sexuality, and fertility, and some accounts, particularly from later Greek and Roman sources, suggest that ritual sex or sacred prostitution may have occurred in connection with her worship, possibly in temple precincts or groves. However, this is still debated among scholars, as some sources may reflect misunderstandings or biased interpretation. Again, people don't want to really admit it. You know, they try to hide all these different facts, but the fact of the matter is, this is how they got down. Okay, this was a fertility goddess. She was worshipped in the time of when? Fertility, right now. We just passed March 21st, right? March 20th, which is the spring equinox. Okay, and we're in that time of fertility, right? Life springing forth, but they do it in a wicked way. They celebrate it as she's bringing life on earth. Okay, so we have to worship with her in an orgy frenzy. Okay, doing madness. All right, anyway, I hope you're edified with that. Kal halalim la Yahweh b'Hashem Yahweh Shai wa Shalom.